Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On this episode, we got a little bit of a controversial topic. Going to be talking about what position in basketball is the most important. If you do like the video, please consider giving us a like and subscribing for weekly content. And if you do have any disagreements or agreements, I'm sure there will be some disagreements. Leave those in the comment section. We'd love to discuss that with you. So obviously, elephant in the room. This is kind of a hard conversation to have in like the modern era of basketball. We've kind of moved to more of a positionless style of basketball where like players are less like regimented in their role and there's a lot more crossover. But I think if we set this up as like, what is like the skill sets that are brought to the table by like a more traditional position or player of that position. So like for point guard, it's like passing and like setting up your teammates, running the offense. For wing players, you got like MJ, Kobe, guys like that who were, two-way players, good defensive stoppers, but scorers, and could do some playmaking stuff that was not primarily their function. And then you've got centers or interior players responsible for rebounding, protecting the basket, stuff like that. Yeah. So that's kind of the way that I want to frame this argument into like three separate categories, just to kind of make it a little bit easier to have this discussion since like we're not really sure they might be listed as a certain position, but they're really doing other things. LeBron is a really good example of that guy who plays more like Magic, even though he's kind of like listed as a small forward. Magic, it was listed at shooting guard some years, but I don't think anybody would argue that he wasn't the point guard of that team. Yeah, do you want to kick us off with what you think?
Yeah, and LeBron definitely made this really hard to even think about too, because originally I was thinking about wing players. They've been the most dominant in terms of a championship team most recently, but LeBron is also playing point guard in those years where he was winning. I think the skill set of the point guard probably is what I would take as the most important. You need someone to be able to facilitate, create space, even hit an open jump shot when it's needed. If you don't have that, I don't think you really have a start of a team. I can't name any bad teams that have a good point guard or good teams that have a bad point guard. So I would probably go with the point guard role. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a point guard though, because now we see so many different players can do things that a point guard can do. Like we see LeBron, Draymond, Jokic all doing point guard duties sometimes, but they're, big guys in the paint. So
right. And even
it's really hard to give it to a position, and I would give it more to like a role and skill set than a position at this point.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're arguing here.
Yeah.
So with respect to like the point guard, like Harden is kind of another weird one. Harden and Doncic, where I think they're more geared towards scoring, but just because of how much they have the ball, they get some assists. But I would still not really consider them like a traditional point guard skill set. I think you might be falling into the media trap here. So if you think about what position has been considered the most important by the media, and that whenever they argue this, it's always gone along with what position do we have the best players at currently. So back during the golden age of centers and into the 2000s, everybody thought centers were the most important because there were so many good centers in the league. Then once there weren't as many good centers in the league and Dwight was the best center by far, it was like between Dwight and Andrew Bynum. Then we moved on and it was a golden age of point guards. Then they're like point guards are the most important. Now we've transitioned and now we've got a lot of really good wing players. And Kawhi Leonard, I feel like this was at the peak of like people arguing this for two-way wings when Kawhi won with the Raptors. Everybody's like, now wings are the most important position. So I think when you're talking about winning a championship, the most important thing is that you have one of those generational all-time type players. And we've seen across the history of the league, if you have one of those, it almost doesn't matter what position they are. You just have to have one. So the real question becomes, what is the most important skill set to get right? Like you can't have a hole at this position if you want to win a title. And it's center. It's always been center. It always will be center. It's the center position. Now, I'm not saying we need to go back to like Rasa Nesterovic and Kendrick Perkins and these like slow lumbering guys, but rebounding, rim protection, efficient scoring on the inside, that's the most important things you need to have right on your team. It doesn't have to be your best player, but you have to have that in order to win a title. Last year's finals, perfect example of that. The Suns did not have an answer for Giannis inside on either end of the floor. And that was ultimately what turned the series. Even though Ayton's a very good center, like Giannis, when they went to him at the center, and even if they had Brook Lopez out on the 3-point line, when they went away from a Brook Lopez lineup, it was Giannis at center, basically. That was what turned the tide of the series. The prior year in the bubble, that front line for the Lakers with Davis and some combination of McGee or Dwight, or when they went with Davis at the 5, that was better than banged up Bam Adebayo. And that was ultimately what turned the series. So anything to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree necessarily. Like, my first reaction to that was like Giannis in the finals last year played so much center. I mean, I don't even know how to consider him. Like, he's an interior, but he's a wing player at the same time.
Kind of. He doesn't really play on the perimeter as much anymore. So, I mean, he primarily plays around the basket now and protects the rim. So, I mean, he's doing center type things. It's tough to have this conversation now, but
that's the
I would
part,
consider
like,
him an interior player. If I had to pigeonhole him into one of the playmaking point guard, wing, or interior player pegs, he would be predominantly to interior player, just based on the rebounding, the shot blocking, all of that stuff.
It's so fluid between positions now and skill sets that's probably why it's so hard to even figure out that conversation. And one of my things for at least revisiting the recent champions was like the two-way side. Like, Giannis is a great two-way player, I think, inside and outside, at least on the defensive end. But so did Kevin Durant and Kawhi when they won their championships recently. I think it's like the two-way defense part that's really what brings it. If they can defend inside and outside, that's like the biggest part of it. And Giannis obviously is just so good at that it can easily turn the tide of a series.
Durant was a weird one when I went through this. So I actually, obviously before like the merger, we had Bill Russell, Wilt, and Kareem kind of destroying the league and owning things. And then post-merger, Kareem and Robert Parrish, throughout the 80s for the Celtics and Lakers, respectively, like they were winning the bulk of the titles. Now, there were some rough center matchups between like the 90s with Michael Jordan, but I could do a whole video on why Michael Jordan kind of defies the rules that we have for basketball. But I mean, even granted with the Bulls, you had either Horace Grant or Dennis Rodman for your interior presence, particularly with Rodman. Like, he's, a monstrous defensive player. So I just kind of went back, looked from the year 2000 on to currently, and just kind of looked at the center matchup or like the interior matchup. And in 86% of those finals, the team with like an advantage at that interior spot, that center spot, as we kind of moved on to like a more perimeter based game that kind of gets a little bit complicated. But for the most part, earlier on, we were still in those regimented positions. 86% of those finals, the team with the best interior player won the series. The exceptions to that, the outliers.
I'm curious to hear this.
We had 2004, Shaq versus Ben Wallace. Now, the argument could be made that the Pistons actually had a better interior that finals, because it was Shaq versus and banged up Karl Malone versus both Wallaces. So I don't know. I gave that nod to the Lakers anyway.
Yeah.
2009, Dwight versus Bynum and Gasol. In that series, you had an all-time talent, generational player in Kobe versus really not a lot on the Magic. I wouldn't consider Dwight in like a generation-defining category for as good as he was. 2016, I'm sorry, I skipped one. 2013, the Heat. Bosh versus Duncan. Bosh was primarily playing center for the Heat at that stage. Duncan was a center. They were the two big interior players. The Heat won that series despite Duncan probably being better. I think it was probably close at that stage in Duncan's career, but And then 2016, when the Cavs came back from that 3-1 series against the Warriors, I think the Warriors had a better front line with Bogut and Draymond Green than Timothy Mozgov and Tristan Thompson. But important to remember, when that series really turned around, Draymond was suspended for a game and Bogut got hurt. And so the Warriors in game 7 had to rely on Festus Ezeli to start at center. He played 10 minutes and it was a complete disaster. Up for debate, there were a couple of ones that I thought were up for debate. 2012 Bosh versus the Perkins and Ibaka front court. I think Bosh is better than Ibaka or Perkins, whoever you want to take.
Yeah.
And then 2019, the banged up Warriors versus the Raptors. I gave the nod to the Raptors in that one, just because like Durant was barely played, and he played a lot of center for those Warriors teams. And yeah, they just, I don't know, they had a ton of injuries, that Warriors group. So I would have initially, I mean, I gave the nod to the Raptors for Gasol and Ibaka and Siakam.
Yeah, I would take that too.
But, you know, you could argue for the Warriors. So anyways, it's around 86%, regardless of where you end up falling. So we'll round it out and say and call it 80. So 8 out of 10 finals, you're winning, you know, with whichever whichever interior players are better. 80% of the finals are going to that team with the better interior presence.
Yeah. Do you think that had more to do with that, or that generational talent that's on those teams alongside with having the better inside?
Some of them it matters.
Yeah, some of it I would say does, and you said it earlier, like it really sometimes just comes down to, do you have Kevin Durant on your team in the finals, or Giannis in his just explosion years?
Right. I mean, there is that component, but you can find a generational player at every position. And so I think it could be that there was a generational player, you know, on one team and wasn't on the other, but I still don't think it would amount to like 86, nearly 90% of finals where the interior matchup is really the thing that turns the tide. I mean, last year is a really good one because I think, you know, Giannis was clearly the best player by far in that series, but the rest of the Suns, I think they had a much more well-rounded roster, much more consistent roster than what the Bucks had, especially when DiVincenzo went out and you were having to play either Bryn Forbes or whatever was left of Jeff Teague out there in a playoff series. So I don't know. I still think that this is the most important position to get right. And I think if you can choose to have your generational player, I think you should choose him to be at center, not like a traditional slow lumbering center. But if you're thinking, I would want a guy who can protect the rim and rebound and score inside. Just get to score inside at will.
Especially now, if your dominant guy is the center and he's on the inside drawing defenders in, I mean, with the way that 3-point shooting is nowadays, like your team's going to knock down 40% of those open threes that the center kicks out if he gets doubled or tripled. So that, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. I think you can, and here's another thing that I kind of looked at. I can get into some more numbers later, but actually I'll just do that now. 15 of 45 finals MVPs since the merger were interior players. I mean, I threw Cedric Maxwell and Dirk as interior players, so that would get you to 13. 8 were point guards if you don't include LeBron. If you do include LeBron, it's 12. Also, one of those is Tony Parker in 2007. I don't think anybody would argue he was more important to that team than Duncan. 23 were wings if you include LeBron and the Warriors' Durant, who combined for 6. I think we mentioned earlier Durant played a lot of center for those Warriors teams. And then LeBron could be considered a point guard. Also, there's an Iguodala who probably doesn't belong in the finals MVP group. So that's 7 that you could easily remove. Also, you know, you have 6 for Jordan. So, yeah, I don't know. 19 MVPs, interior guys, including Dirk. 15 wings. I didn't include Harden in that group. I know we kind of talked about him being more of a wing, but I threw him at point guard. it said 19 interior, 15 wings, 11 point guards for MVPs. If you look at the bottom of the league now, the Cavs are in like the 4th seed. They drafted a phenomenal rim protector in Evan Mobley. Yep. They also have Jared Allen. The Blazers, bottom of the league, despite having like what we would have considered preseason a much more talented roster, but they don't really have any interior presence at all.
Yeah, we even talked about the Cavs having a logjam at center, but it turns out to be working all right for him.
I didn't expect Evan Mobley to be this good this quickly. Yeah. He's been phenomenal. And like, you probably haven't watched them this year, but they actually run like pick and roll with him handling and Jared Allen rolling to the basket. And it's stupid because he can pass really well. And like, there's just like the teams are not equipped to handle that. Yeah. And then 9 of the 10 playoff like teams that are in the outside of the playoffs looking in right now don't really have a viable option at center. I consider the Hawks one of those teams because Capella has been terrible this year. And then the Pacers are the only team that do, and they've got a whole myriad of issues that probably are contributing to that a little bit more. But I found that really interesting. Like when you look at the bottom of the league, the teams that are really sucking are the teams that really don't have like a good rim protector, interior finisher, type guy.
Yeah, some of them don't have anything at all, which is the sad part.
Yeah. If you're a Rockets fan, it's been pretty tough. At least the Thunder have Giddey and Shai Gilgeous that they can kind of hold on to, and Poku.
Yeah, can't forget him.
Yeah, can't forget Poku. So question for you. What's the last finals team? It's the last team to win a championship that was completely devoid of any rim protection. Like just had a huge hole at center.
My first thought was maybe the Mavericks, but I forgot they had Chandler.
Yeah, they had a defensive player of the year at center.
Yeah. How far back are we going?
As far back as you want, buddy.
That sounds like it's going to be a long time then. I don't know. Everyone since I've been alive has had a pretty good center if they win.
That's pretty much the case. There may be one in the 70s that I'm not aware of, but
yeah, that's stretching my limits.
I couldn't think of any. What about teams without a really solid point guard, really solid like playmaker?
Not any recently. I wouldn't. Well, I mean the Bucks didn't have much. I guess Holiday, but I wouldn't call him like a star. He was really solid.
No, I mean and I would consider him a great playmaker.
Yeah.
So there's one. There's also the Michael Jordan led Bulls. You know, they had Scottie Pippen, who was a pretty good playmaker, but not like a top tier playmaker, like kind of what we're talking about. Paxton, Kerr, Ron Harper, BJ Armstrong, all the point guards who kind of cycled through there throughout the years. They were fine, but I don't think we would really consider them the top echelon of playmaking or even above average in the league at that time. Same with the Kobe title teams, any of them. Derek Fisher, solid point guard, fine role player. That was really what he was, and they didn't really have any elite playmaking on any of those teams. The 06 Heat, the worst finals team we've had in the last 20 years. Gary Payton and old Jason Williams. Not really much to get excited about playmaking wise there. So we've got several examples of that, and I think if it were on me picking, I think that the point guard is the position that you can do without. If you have like a really good scoring option, individual scoring options, and a good defensive team, I think you can do without the playmaking.
And now like so many players can just do that instead of designating it to a point guard at this point.
Right. I know we had, the point god Chris Paul in the finals last year versus like a kind of point guardless Bucks team.
Yeah, I don't know.
They really didn't even have a backup. Like Drew Holiday, I consider more of a shooting guard in what he does. And it worked. What about wing players? Can you think of any title teams without good like two-way scorers type players on the wings?
Maybe like I don't know if the 07 Spurs would be a good.
I had them.
There. I mean,
I had them. I know they have Ginobili, but I feel like
that's what I was kind of
he was
teetering
more of a
on.
point guard off the bench for them.
Yeah.
Outside of that,
Recently
you
it's
have like Bruce
been,
Bowen.
yeah. Recently, I mean, it's been wings. Kobe, I would consider him a wing player, like Wade with the '06 wing player.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, maybe the
Particular,
Spurs are the most recent one, I would say.
I think the Spurs are really the only example. 99, they were also kind of the same deal. And then 05, 07, and even 14, I know they had Kawhi Leonard, but he was like pretty limited at that stage in his career. He was definitely not the player we know him to be
Yeah.
now.
No, he just locked down LeBron, and that's really where the stars came out.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and then he turned into a really good offensive player after that. So like in those finals, 99, I don't know. I was like, I don't know enough about the 99 finals matchup between the Spurs and Knicks to really comment on who had the better wing, like perimeter group in that series. I would probably say the Knicks, but I'm not gonna like stake my reputation on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd only been alive for about a week at that point.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I've been alive a little bit longer, but still, I wasn't watching basketball the degree I do now. '05, the Spurs played the Pistons. I think you'd probably give the advantage for like wings to Tayshaun Prince and Rip
Yeah.
Hamilton. '07, I don't know if you consider LeBron a wing.
At that point, I would have.
It was such an overmatch in talent anyway, but regardless, advantage for the wing position there to Cleveland. They still lost the series. 14, obvious advantage with LeBron and Wade, still lost. So I think you can build a team around anybody, but I just don't think you can build a title team without having the rim protecting, rebounding, interior scoring aspect solidified on your roster. However you end up doing that, I just think that that's a position kind of like the Celtics don't really have that for sure right now, and we see them kind of sputtering.
I don't have a point guard either.
Yeah, that makes it really tough when you don't have two of the three archetypes here.
Yeah.
I just don't think you can live without it. I don't think you've ever been able to live without it, and I know people kind of view centers like the dodo bird, like they're basically extinct, but I think it's a skill set, no matter where you get it, that still really matters in this league.
Yeah. Are there any teams now that don't have like a great center but are still doing pretty, like the Bulls? I don't know if I would give them like a star center, but they're still killing it.
Vucevic gives them enough, I feel like, at least with the interior scoring part. I think they're a regular season. I think they have a regular season team written all over them.
Really?
I don't think this is sustainable in the playoffs. What happens when they play Giannis?
Yeah.
He's just going to annihilate them. They don't really have an answer for Durant either. Embiid, they don't have an answer for. Like they're just going to run into a team. It's fine to beat up on the Pistons in your division, the Pacers in your division. That's all good and well, but I think when they get into a really tough playoff series with some of the top tier teams, I just don't think what they have is going to be sustainable.
Yeah. In terms of your argument for the center, I would say that a center mismatch is probably the most dominating thing for a team. If you can just get like a center, like I know every time the Sixers would play the Celtics, I'd be like, great, Embiid's going to go for 40 again. Shooting 80%.
Christmas Day, we saw, they didn't go to Ayton that much, but the Warriors had no answer for Ayton. I mean, it was just a basket every time they got in the ball. I mean, standing wise, if you're looking, like if we consider Giannis a center, which kind of like I kind of outlined why I did, and that kind of skewed my argument, obviously, but I think he performs more center roles than he does like any other position. I mean, there's not really in the top group of teams, we're not really seeing any that don't have like a respectable center at least, or something that they can like be somewhat excited about. I mean, the Warriors have Draymond who fills that role defensively. I think they're the one example you can point to that kind of puts a hole in my argument, but they also have the greatest shooter of all time on their team. So I think that helps. I think when you ask people like who watch basketball what that team needs, it's a center. Yeah, I think the Hornets are a really good example of this too, because they have a hole at center. They're currently in the seventh seed, but they're one of the worst defensive teams in the league because they have nothing around the rim to keep people away from the basket. And even LeBron, like all throughout his career, he was very fortunate that the league moved in the direction that it did because he has always struggled with like good shot blockers. We always had trouble with the Pacers when he was with the Heat because of Roy Hibbert. Um, and with centers kind of people moving away from them, kind of misinterpreting what made the Warriors so good when they were dominating the decade. Um, yeah, that really worked to his benefit because there's just no one
And
around the rim to stop him.
ironically, it might be the centers that caused that because of the transition to the 3-point shooting. I think part of that was caused by just, defenses trying to guard the center so much that they're having open shooters and it becomes a necessity.
Yeah, I'm not arguing for us to go back to the slow lumbering centers who can't move around at all. Like I think that I'm glad that has died out. If I never see another Kendrick Perkins post up attempt, it'll be too soon. Yeah, I think we've moved away from that, but we've seen especially with the kids coming up, like the Chet Holmgrens and Victor Wembanyama, like the center has finally, I don't know, entered the modern era where they're able to move a lot on the perimeter and do a little bit more than just stand under the basket. But the rim protecting and rebounding and interior scoring is really what you want. Yeah, I think you just can't live without it. I think we kind of moved away from it, but the Warriors, when they were, dominating, they only won one title with the group without Durant, and it was against an extremely injured Cavs team.
Yeah.
So I think people kind of looked at them as the dominant team and like, oh, we have to build it like the Warriors, like just shoot a bunch of threes. We don't need a center, forget the center. And they kind of didn't realize that Draymond Green was like able to fulfill the defensive part of the center thing. And then they also had Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, three of the best perimeter shooters in the history of the league, and probably the best perimeter scorer in Kevin Durant. Probably the best scoring forward we've ever had. I'm hard pressed to think of anybody who can match him. And so they were like, oh, well, this is the template. But really, it was just that they had like an all-time team. And I think the template should still be just like football. You want to build it from the interior out.
Yeah.
That's my argument, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I mean, valid points there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the strongest argument is probably for the point guard. After that, I still think the wing position. I think if you got a defensive, like some defensive guys and some guys who can shoot threes, they don't even necessarily have to be the same player. It's great if they are, but I think you can cobble together whatever to make that work.
Yeah.
But I think if you've got somebody who could intimidate people around the basket so that everything is like mid-range shots and out, I think that goes a really long way. And not getting free throws too is huge. We've seen that with Harden and Trae Young this year, and Dame to some extent. Like they're not getting to the line as much, and their scoring numbers are down. And in the case of Dame, like their team and the Hawks, they're really struggling this year.
Yeah, it's at least for the wings, you can build a team of 3-and-D guys that can shoot 40% at this point and play defense. If you get that one dominant like KD or Giannis who can also play center, at the end of the day, I think that's probably what's the most important thing in terms of winning a championship.
Yeah, I still think you can win if your generational player is at point guard.
Yeah, definitely.
Or shooting. I think you can win with them at any position, but I think and that's why I kind of wanted to move away from who has to be your best player to like what skill set is the most important to like have right on your roster. But yeah, I mean, if you have Durant, I mean, he's a once in a lifetime player. That makes it a lot easier.
Especially when you put him on the same team as Curry.
Yeah, exactly. Now, yeah, we should see the Nets there at the end this year, but yeah, I don't know. I'm skeptical on the Bulls still. I think that they're a team that's built around the fast break, and I think when the game slows down in the playoffs, they could find themselves in trouble. And they don't have a lot of flexibility with their lineups. And I just think when you start, even when they play the Heat, like how are they going to have to keep Jimmy Butler from just shooting 20 free throws and getting to the basket at will? Like they don't have that guy. Vucevic can like hold it down inside, but like that's not what I would want to live or die on.
Yeah, I guess their best hopes for the Heaters to hope they still have a bunch of two-way guys rotating through the lineup in the playoffs.
Right. Well, with some of the ways our two-way guys play, I'm not sure that they would want that either. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still hard pressed to be convinced that it's not center. Just based on like you really can't find teams that didn't have solid interior play, at least on the defensive end, that won titles. You could find teams without good wings. You could find teams without good point guards, but you don't find them without like a solid like guy in the middle.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know a lot of people that would agree with you for sure. That have never
a lot of the old heads, a lot of the new guys probably won't. But I guess I did grow up in that era. But I think you brought up an interesting point about the 3-point shooting kind of when the Warriors took hold of the league, and that's what kind of got rid of the centers. I don't think it was. I agree to an extent, but I think it was also there just weren't any good centers. There was nobody. I mean, we had Dwight and we had Andrew Bynum. Embiid was still coming along, and like, who did you say?
Boogie Cousins in like 2000.
Yeah, and Boogie, they weren't going anywhere because it was the Kings, and like
he could shoot threes at that point. He was shooting threes a little bit.
Yeah. I think we didn't have examples of teams with centers doing well for a variety of reasons. I mean, we had Anthony Davis on the Pelicans, which is a complete dumpster fire. Also, he refused to play center. And then Boogie Cousins with the Kings, and that didn't really work either. And when they united on the Pelicans, I'm skeptical as how that would have worked out, because I think we've definitely moved on from you needing two twin towers down there clogging up the paint. I don't think we'll ever go back to that, and I don't want to. So I think during like a dark age of centers, when it was like Dwight was like the best example we had. He had no post moves, so he wasn't a real threat around the basket. Even DeAndre Jordan, like you think about those Clippers and Warriors series, like if you tried to put Draymond Green for a 7-game series, regardless of how old he is, on Shaquille O'Neal in his prime or Joel Embiid now, I even think Jokic at this stage would probably cook him in a 7-game series. But during the Warriors' reign of terror, they didn't have to worry about that. Like DeAndre Jordan isn't going to hurt you with his post game. Dwight Howard isn't going to hurt you with his post game when he was in Houston. And then what else was there? Anthony Davis out there by himself in New Orleans whatever odd year that they made the playoffs, and like Portland with Nurkic, like he's fine, but he's not really going to kill you out there. And then they just also played the math, like twos are worth more than three. I'm sorry, threes are worth more than two. So I think that contributed to this, people kind of having a tarnished view of centers, but I think we're going to start to come back around.
Well, you see centers doing more now. Like some can shoot, some can, do the playmaking and move the ball around. And I think that makes them way more valuable at this point.
They're more versatile now, which is really exciting. But the one thing that the really good ones have, and this is why the Timberwolves never go anywhere, is they're really good at protecting. The ones who are really good are good at protecting the basket, or they have somebody alongside of them who could. Like Jokic had Jeremy Grant for a little bit, but now he's able to do that on his own. Joel Embiid can protect the basket really well. Karl Anthony Towns can't, and that's why the Timberwolves are in the lottery every year. This year it looks to be a little bit different, but I still don't expect them to really do much of anything until he figures out how to play some defense. I just don't see it working.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. Well, that's my argument. I'm sticking to it. Anything else to add?
No, that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, join us next week. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about. Hopefully Klay Thompson coming back, but we'll see how that goes.
I saw today that he hit 24 straight threes in a shoot around. So
yeah, I don't know that the league is ready for what the Warriors are about to unleash on us, especially if they get Wiseman back and he's as good as some people think he could be. I know you're higher on him than I am, but
Yeah. I mean, he's just 7', 7'1", 7'2", and just completely raw talent. And
Yeah,
that's
super athletic. I think he could be a slow bloomer, kind of like Aiton was. But I think if they bring him along like they have Kuminga, where it's just like they give him a little bit to do at a time and just not complicate it too much, just like, hey, we need you to do these 2 or 3 things. And then just once he gets those 2 or 3 things down, then give him a little bit more. Last year, they just thrust him into the starting lineup, and that was not the answer for a guy who basically didn't play college and took a
yeah.
year off of basketball to go from high school, take a year off, and then straight to the league as your starting center on a team with playoff aspirations. That's a tough ask.
Yeah. The beauty now is their team is so good that he can kind of ease into it in
Oh
all
yeah.
aspects. Like Kuminga is turning out to be a good defender, so he doesn't have to be, that prime rim protector the entire time.
Yeah. And
Draymond
I
can guard anyone.
was Looney hurt to start last year. I feel like he may have been.
I don't remember.
I don't
That
remember
might have been the
either.
reason they threw him in there.
Yeah, they may have had to have had a necessity, but Looney's solid, so they don't have to he's good for 20 minutes a game. So
Yeah.
you can start with him and then move Draymond to the 5, and then just you don't necessarily need Wiseman to give you much, but if he can, great.